The Superior Courthouse was an imposing temple of granite and marble, its cavernous halls echoing with the hushed, reverent footsteps of people on important business. I felt a profound sense of being out of place, a man whose hands were more familiar with grease and steel than with legal briefs. My suit, the best one I owned, felt stiff and foreign on my body, but, as I sat on a polished wooden bench, I was filled with a pride so immense it felt like a physical pressure in my chest. Today, my son Daniel was being sworn into the state bar. After years of my working overtime shifts, of pouring every spare dollar I had into his tuition, of sacrificing my own small dreams for his big one, this was the finish line. This was our shared victory. The courtroom itself was magnificent, with dark wood paneling that rose to a vaulted ceiling, and portraits of stern-faced judges from centuries past staring down at us. I found a seat in the second row, my heart thrumming with anticipation. I saw my ex-wife, Cynthia, and her husband, Richard, take their seats in the front row. Richard was a judge in this very courthouse, a man of immense influence and wealth, and his presence here felt both appropriate and intimidating. I gave them a polite nod. Our relationship was cordial, if distant, bound only by our shared connection. To Daniel, all that mattered to me was my son, watching him stand before the court, ready to take his oath. The ceremony began with a solemnity that befitted the setting. A panel of judges filed in, taking their seats on the elevated bench. The presiding judge was Richard. He spoke eloquently about the honor and responsibility of the legal profession, his voice resonating with an easy authority. Then, he announced that before administering the oath, he would invite each of the new lawyers to introduce the family and friends who had come to support them. My heart swelled. I straightened my tie, a proud, nervous smile spreading across my face, ready for my son to acknowledge the journey we had taken together to get to this very moment. Daniel rose, looking confident and sharp in his new suit. He smiled, a brilliant camaraderie smile that lit up his face. "I'd first like to thank my mother, Cynthia, for her unwavering belief in me," he began. "And I owe an immeasurable debt to my father and my mentor, Judge Richard Sterling, whose guidance has been my North Star." He gestured to the front row. My own smile faltered. My father and my mentor. The words hung in the air. Then, Daniel half turned and gestured vaguely in my direction. "I'd also like to acknowledge a very dear family friend, Frank, whose support over the years has been invaluable." Family friend. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. Family friend. After 25 years of fatherhood, of packing his lunches, of teaching him how to drive, of selling my beloved classic car to pay for his final year of law school, I had been publicly demoted. I was no longer his father. I was an invaluable accessory, a supportive friend. The courtroom, which had felt so grand and momentous, suddenly felt like a stage for my own public humiliation. I could feel the curious eyes of strangers on me, and I was forced to sit there, my face frozen in a parody of a proud smile, as the man who had been his father for 5 years accepted the title I had earned over a lifetime. The ceremony concluded, and a polite, restrained applause filled the courtroom. The newly minted lawyers, my son among them, were swarmed by their well-wishing families. I remained in my seat for a long moment, the words "family friend" echoing in the cavernous space of my mind. It was a label so dismissive, so profoundly inaccurate, that I felt a strange sense of dissociation, as if he had been talking about someone else entirely. My sister Sarah, who had taken the day off from her nursing job to be there, leaned over and squeezed my shoulder. "Let's get out of the main hall," she whispered, her voice tight with an anger she was feeling for me. "I need some air." We moved into the great hall of the courthouse, a vast, marble-floored rotunda, where the celebration was continuing. I watched as Daniel was enveloped by a circle of Richard's colleagues, powerful lawyers, and judges who clapped him on the back, welcoming him into their exclusive club. He was a natural in that world, his smile easy, his posture confident. He looked every bit the part of the successful young attorney he was about to become. And I, his father, the man who had funded this transformation, stood on the periphery, an outsider looking in at a world I had paid for, but was not welcome to enter. I had built the ship and provisioned it for a long journey. And now, I was being thanked for my services, from the shore as it sailed away without me. My ex-wife, Cynthia, finally glided over to me, her smile bright but her eyes cool. "Frank, thank you so much for coming," she said, her tone the one you use for a distant cousin or a former neighbor. "It meant so much to Daniel that you could be here to see this." Her words were polite, perfectly chosen, and utterly devastating. She was reinforcing the narrative, cementing my status as a peripheral guest. She saw no irony, no cruelty in her words. In her mind, the story had been revised. Her new, powerful husband was the father figure, and I was a relic from a past she had successfully upgraded. Sarah's anger was a stark contrast to my own numb shock. "Family friend," she muttered to me as Cynthia walked away. "After you spent every weekend for 2 years rebuilding that engine to sell the car for his tuition, does she have any idea what you sacrificed? Does Daniel?" Her words were a necessary validation. They affirmed that my pain was real, that my sense of betrayal was justified. She was the keeper of my history, the witness to my quiet, unseen sacrifices. Without her there, I think I might have started to believe their version of the story myself. I knew I couldn't stay for the luncheon they were hosting at a private club nearby. The thought of sitting at a table, making small talk, and pretending that my heart wasn't a shattered wreck was unbearable. "Let's go, Sarah," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "I've seen enough." We walked out of the grand courthouse, leaving the celebration behind. The city that greeted us was gray and overcast, a low, heavy sky threatening rain. It was a perfect match for the bleak, desolate landscape of my own heart. I had never felt so proud and so completely erased in the same day. Instead of going to the fancy luncheon at the private club, Sarah and I went to a small, old-fashioned diner a few blocks from my apartment. It was a place of worn vinyl booths, thick ceramic mugs, and the comforting smell of frying bacon. It was my world, a universe, away from the polished marble and hushed reverence of the courthouse. The contrast was a painful, physical thing. I had just witnessed my son ascend into a world of power and influence, a world that had no place for the man who had laid the foundation, brick by painful brick. The coffee the waitress poured was bitter, but it was real, and right now, that felt like the only thing I could hold on to. As we sat there, the story of my sacrifices, a story I had never told anyone in its entirety, came pouring out of me. I told Sarah about the endless overtime shifts I had picked up, the exhaustion that had settled deep into my bones for years. I told her, my voice cracking, about selling my 1969 Mustang, a car I had spent a decade restoring, the one thing that was truly mine, just to cover the unexpected tuition shortfall for his final year. I spoke of the skipped vacations, the patched-up roof on my own house, the quiet pride I had felt seeing his textbooks on the table, knowing my aching back was paying for the words inside them. These weren't complaints. They were an inventory of love, a catalog of a father's devotion. Asterisk, "He's not a bad kid," I said, trying to make sense of the senseless. "He's just ambitious. He sees what Richard can do for him, the doors he can open. He's a judge. He can make a single phone call and get Daniel an interview at a top firm. What can I do? Give him advice on how to change a faulty alternator." The painful truth was that my son had made a strategic calculation. He had weighed my lifetime of love and sacrifice against the immense career advantage his stepfather represented, and he had chosen power. He had chosen the future over the past, and in his mind, I was firmly a part of that past. The victory of the day, the culmination of everything I had worked for, felt completely hollow. I had succeeded. My son was a lawyer, but in the process of achieving this shared dream, I had lost him. I had been rendered obsolete, a tool that was no longer needed now that the job was done. The title of father had been transferred, like a property deed, to the man who could offer him more. The pride I had felt that morning was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sense of being used, of being nothing more than a stepping stone on my son's path to a life where I no longer fit. Sarah listened to it all, her expression a mixture of sadness and fierce loyalty. When I was done, she reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "You know who you are, Frank," she said, her voice firm. "You are the man who built the foundation. A house is worthless without a solid foundation, no matter how fancy the roof is. He knows it, deep down. He's just blinded by the shiny new paint job right now. The question isn't what he's going to do. It's what you are going to do. Are you going to let him define you as a guest in your own life?" Her words were a challenge, a call to reclaim my own dignity from the wreckage. I spent the next day in a fog of grief, wandering through my small house, a home filled with the ghosts of my son's childhood. His first-grade photo was on the mantelpiece, his gap-toothed smile a painful reminder of a simpler time. His high school football trophy was on a shelf, a symbol of a time when I was the proud father on the sidelines, my role unquestioned. The silence of the house was deafening, amplifying the feeling of loss. I knew I couldn't let it fester. I had to talk to him. I had to make him understand the depth of the wound he had inflicted. I owed it to myself, and to the father I had been. I called him that evening, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and dread. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. "Dad, is everything okay?" he asked, as if he had no idea. I took a deep breath and kept my voice steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing me yell. "No, Daniel, everything is not okay," I said calmly. "We need to talk about what you said yesterday. We need to talk about you calling me a family friend in front of a courtroom full of people." He immediately became defensive, the apologies clumsy and transparent. "Dad, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't mean it like that. It was just a weird, formal setting. Richard was sitting right there. He was the judge. I didn't want to make it awkward. You know you're my father. I thought you knew that." His excuses were a weak shield against the truth. He was admitting that he had publicly demoted me to avoid a moment of social awkwardness for his powerful stepfather. He had prioritized another man's comfort over my lifelong dignity. I didn't let him off the hook. I didn't yell, but I used the truth as a weapon. "Let me tell you what a family friend doesn't do, Daniel," I said, my voice cold and precise. "A family friend doesn't work 70-hour weeks to pay for your books. A family friend doesn't sell his most prized possession, the car he spent 15 years building, to pay for your tuition so you don't have to take out another loan. I did that. Your father did that. And you stood up in that courtroom and you erased him. You erased me. For what? So a judge wouldn't feel awkward." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breathing, ragged and uneven. My words had finally hit their mark, slicing through his justifications. I'm so sorry, Dad," he finally whispered, his voice cracking, with an emotion that sounded, for the first time, genuine. "I was wrong. It was a cowardly thing to do. I was intimidated, and I was weak, and I hurt you. What can I do to fix it?" The question hung in the air. It was a start, but I knew a simple apology wasn't enough to repair the damage. "I don't know, Daniel," I said honestly. "But you're the one who broke it. You need to be the one to figure out how to put it back together." I ended the call, leaving the weight of atonement squarely on his shoulders. Weeks crawled by, and the silence from Daniel was a heavy, suffocating blanket. I threw myself into my work at the garage, the familiar smell of oil and steel, a welcome distraction from the gnawing pain in my gut. I tried to convince myself that I had made my peace with it, that I had to move on, but every time I looked at my empty bank account, a stark reminder of the law degree I had funded, a fresh wave of bitterness washed over me. I had given my son the tools to build a new life, and he had used them to build a wall between us. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Richard, Daniel's stepfather. My immediate reaction was defensive, my guard shooting up, but his voice was calm and direct, not confrontational. He asked if we could meet for coffee, saying he felt there were things that needed to be said between us, man to man. Reluctantly, I agreed, my curiosity warring with my resentment. We met at a neutral coffee shop downtown, a place halfway between his world and mine. He didn't waste time with small talk. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Frank, I wanted to apologize. What happened at that ceremony was wrong." I was deeply uncomfortable with the introduction, and I told both Cynthia and Daniel as much afterward. "It was disrespectful to you, and I am sorry for my part in it, even my passive part." I was stunned into silence. This man, who I had cast as the villain in my story, the usurper of my role, was showing me more direct respect than my own son had. "Daniel told me about the car you sold," Richard continued, his gaze unwavering. "He told me about the overtime, the sacrifices. A man doesn't do that for a family friend. You are his father, Frank. You built the foundation of the man he is today. I have no desire or intention to replace you. My role is to be a mentor to him in his chosen profession, a role that I am only able to fill because you gave him the education and the character to succeed. I hope you can believe that." His words were a powerful, unexpected validation, a bridge, extended from the most unlikely of places. Our conversation changed everything. It didn't erase the hurt, but it reframed it. Richard wasn't the enemy. He was a decent man caught in the middle of a complex family dynamic, trying to navigate the insecurities of his wife and the ambitions of his stepson. My anger, which had been a diffuse, confusing thing, now had a clear target: the choices made by Cynthia and Daniel. Richard's integrity had, ironically, made their lack of it even more glaring. I left that coffee shop with a strange sense of lightness, My burden of resentment towards him lifted, leaving me with a clearer, albeit more painful, understanding of the real problem. A month after my meeting with Richard, Daniel called me again. His tone was completely different from our last conversation. The defensiveness was gone, replaced by a seriousness and maturity I hadn't heard before. "Dad," he said, "I'm working on my first big case. It's a pro bono one that the firm let me take on. It's for a small, family-owned garage, a lot like yours. They're being pushed out by a big developer. I was wondering if I could talk to you about it. Not for legal advice, but for life advice. I need to understand what a man like that is fighting for." His request was a thunderbolt. He wasn't just calling to apologize again. He was calling to ask for my guidance. He was, for the first time since he had entered his new, rarefied world, acknowledging the value of my world, of my experience, of my wisdom. He was seeing me not as a relic from his past, but as a resource for his present. This was the olive branch I had been waiting for, not a grand gesture of apology, but a small, meaningful act of respect. It was the first step towards rebuilding the bridge he had burned. We met at the old diner, our new neutral ground. As he laid out the details of the case, I saw a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. It was the same fire he had when he was a kid, arguing passionately about some small injustice on the playground. It was the spirit of the boy I had raised. A boy with a strong moral compass. A compass that had been temporarily skewed by the magnetic pull of wealth and ambition. He wasn't just talking about legal strategy. He was talking about fairness, about community, about the dignity of a working man, all the values I had tried to instill in him. As I listened, I gave him my perspective. I spoke of the pride of building something with your own hands, of the terror of losing it all to forces beyond your control, of the importance of a legacy that isn't measured in dollars, but in a good name and a job well done. I was not just talking about his client, I was talking about myself, and he knew it. He listened intently, taking notes, his respect for my words palpable. In that small diner booth, we were not a lawyer and a mechanic. We were a father and a son, connecting on a level that had been lost for years. This conversation was the beginning of our reconciliation. It was more powerful than any apology, because it was based on action, not words. Daniel was showing me, not just telling me, that he valued who I was. He was integrating my world into his, proving that the foundation I had built was still essential to the man he wanted to become. My personal growth, my ability to move past the initial, all-consuming pain, came from my willingness to accept this new dynamic, to see it not as a consolation prize, but as a more mature, more honest evolution of our relationship. Several months later, Daniel won the case. He called me from the courthouse steps, his voice ringing with a triumphant, unadulterated joy. "We did it, Dad," he yelled into the phone. "We won." The first person he called, the first person he wanted to share his victory with, was me. That single, simple act was a more powerful acknowledgement of my place in his life than any title or a seating arrangement could ever be. He hadn't just won a legal battle, he had won back a piece of his own soul, and in doing so, he had won back his father. That weekend, he insisted on hosting a small dinner at his apartment. He invited me, my sister Sarah, his mother, and Richard. When we were all gathered, he stood at the head of the table, raised a glass, and looked directly at me. "Before we eat," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I need to correct a grave error I made a few months ago." He proceeded to publicly and unequivocally apologize for his actions at the bar ceremony, calling it a moment of profound weakness and disrespect that he would regret for the rest of his life. He owned his mistake completely, without justification or excuse. Then, he turned his toast to me. "I stand here today as a lawyer because of the sacrifices of my father, Frank," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "He worked tirelessly, sold his prized possessions, and put my dreams ahead of his own at every turn. Richard is my mentor, and I am incredibly grateful for his guidance. But Frank is my father. He is the man who built my foundation, who taught me the difference between right and wrong. Any good I do in this world is a reflection of the man he raised me to be." It was a public reclamation of the truth. A healing balm on a wound I thought would never close. I felt a sense of profound, peaceful closure. The public slight had been answered with a public honor. The borrowed title had been returned to its rightful owner. Our relationship was not magically healed, but it was on a new, solid ground, built on the bedrock of a hard-won respect. I looked at my son, no longer just a lawyer, but a good man, and I knew that my life's work had not been erased after all. It was standing right in front of me. The sacrifices a parent makes are often written in invisible ink, a private ledger of love that no one else ever sees. We don't do it for the applause or the recognition, but because our children's future is the most important legacy we can build. But what happens when that sacrifice is publicly dismissed? Have you ever given your all for someone only to be made to feel like a stranger in their success story? Share your experience in the comments below. Let's talk about the unseen foundations and the people who built them. Your story is a powerful testament to the true meaning of support, and by sharing it, you remind everyone that the most valuable contributions are rarely listed on a program. If this resonated with you, subscribe and share, because everyone deserves to have their foundation on.